The dark winter of COVID-19 and shutdowns is here, but the spring of vaccines and fiscal stimulus is finally on its way. This is Bloomberg Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This week, contributors Larry Summers of Harvard and Stephanie Flanders of Bloomberg. Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health.
If you get anywhere between 70 and 85% of the population vaccinated, you would create an umbrella of immunity over the community.
Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, and Catherine Mann of Citigroup.
I think entertainment in person, sports, Broadway, concerts, people want to go back and be in the real life. So those will come back.
This week, winter officially arrived in the Northern Hemisphere, bringing with it the longest night of the year and an increased number of COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. And in Britain, well, Britain experienced a virtual lockdown reinforced by a host of countries cutting it off.
Given the early evidence we have on this new variant of the virus, the potential risk it poses, it is with a very heavy heart, I must tell you, we cannot continue with Christmas as planned.
But the news wasn't all bad, far from it. Congress finally got over its disagreements and came to terms on the second largest stimulus package in the history of the United States. That's one that will offer hope to hundreds of thousands of Americans who otherwise would lose their benefits at the end of the holiday season. That is, if President Trump can get over his objections.
I am asking Congress to amend this bill and increase the ridiculously low $600 to $2,000 or $4,000 for a couple.
And we had the arrival of not one but two vaccines that look to be remarkably effective, with medical workers and the elderly at the front of the line to get the protection that they so badly need. So we begin with the scientists and the doctors, and the person who has been our guide and our expert throughout this experience, Dr. Anthony Fauci of NIH, who, it happens, had gotten his inoculation just the day before we talked with him. So we started with a question on all of our minds: how does it feel?
For at least 5 or 6 hours after the injection, I didn't feel anything at all. I mean, less so than a flu vaccine. Then a late afternoon, early evening, I started to get a little bit of an ache, really nothing to distract me or bother me, but just something that when I press on it, you could actually feel it. Had a good night's sleep last night. I didn't get, a lot of muscle aches or anything. I mean, I felt something a little different, like there was something going on, like maybe a little warm, a little flushed. Woke up this morning, I feel perfectly fine. The only thing I have now is that where the injection site is still is a little sore. But when I say sore, I mean really not very distractingly sore, just baseline, borderline.
If there are side effects, how quickly would they kick in?
They usually all occur within the first 12 hours, and they last between 24 and at the most 36 hours. It's extremely unusual for someone to have something beyond 36 to 48 hours.
Now, you said in getting your inoculation, it was for two reasons. First of all, you are a physician. You were actually treating patients. But secondly, you wanted it to really represent to people that this truly is safe. We don't need to be worried about it. Do you have a sense that there is much resistance at this point in the vaccination program?
It's getting better, thank goodness. When we did surveys, a month or so ago, there was almost 50% of the people had some reservations or skepticism about getting vaccinated. The last survey, which was just last week, they said that more than 65% of the people said that they would be willing to get the vaccine. We really want to get that up even much higher than that, because the projection is that if you get anywhere between 70 and 85% of the population vaccinated, you would create an umbrella of immunity over the community, which could really get the level of virus so low that it would not be a threat. And then you could answer the question that everyone seems to be asking appropriately, is that when can we start approaching some degree of normality? When can we be doing things like safely having the children in school, or going to a restaurant and sitting indoors or going to a movie theater. I would think if we start getting the general population vaccinated, let's say mid-April, between now and then, we're going through the various priorities. We started off healthcare providers and people in nursing homes and long-term facilities. The second level is people over 75 and individuals in what's called necessary or important places in society to keep society running. And that could be anything from a police officer to a fireman to someone who runs a grocery store so people can get food. When you get through those priorities and you get to what I call open season, like anybody can get the vaccination, even though you're not in a priority group, I imagine that's probably going to be sometime in April. And then if we can really get vaccines going in April, May, June, July, and August, by the time we get to the end of the summer, I think we can get to that goal that I'm talking about getting the overwhelming majority of the population vaccinated.
So if we keep going on the course we are right now, and obviously there can be turns one way or the other on this course, if we keep going the way we're headed right now, you're saying Labor Day is a likely scenario, sort of in the bell curve, that's sort of in the middle of the bell curve.
Yeah, I would think so. I think, again, there's a lot of contingencies and ifs here. One of the big if is that the supply of the vaccines that we think is on target continue. We don't get any glitches in production, because if we have a glitch in production, then the expected number of doses don't arrive. Even though people want to get vaccinated, you're not going to vaccinate them. So the two things that are important: A, production goes along the way we hope it will, and I think it will. And number two, a substantial proportion of the people continue to want to get vaccinated.
As far as you're concerned right now, is there anything that we could do as a government, as a society, to expedite that, to have even more production or more distribution?
Yes, that's a good question. In fact, what we're doing is that we're negotiating in contractual negotiations with the companies that are already providing a substantial number of doses to see if we can get yet again another added amount from that company. We're negotiating with Pfizer, we're negotiating with Moderna, as well as other companies, to try and get the numbers higher than what the original projection was.
Now you do science, you do medicine, you don't do politics. At the same time, in this stimulus package, there is money put aside for vaccines. As I understand, around $8 or $9 billion for vaccine distribution, maybe another as much as $20 billion, I've heard, for testing and tracing. Give us a sense as a public health official, how important that money is right now. How badly is it needed?
Well, thank you for asking that question. It is definitely needed, because vaccine distribution is a critical issue. Because A, you could produce, first of all, there are multiple steps. Is the vaccine safe and effective? Well, thank goodness it is not only safe and effective, it is highly efficacious, 94 to 95%. So we're starting off, luckily, with a really good product. The next thing is producing it. The next thing is distributing it, getting it to where it needs to go. And then the third thing is at the local public health level, getting it into the arms of individuals. And that can be a complicated issue. It's very easy to do when you go to the hospital and you say, we're going to vaccinate healthcare providers. They're all there. They all come to work. They're all healthcare providers. You line them up and you stick it in their arm. But when you got to go out into the community, particularly in those communities that don't have good access to healthcare, those are the situations that are going to require resources to help expedite the distribution of vaccine to those people.
We learned this week, actually last weekend, about a new strain of the coronavirus that they found in England. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, came out and said, this is a real problem. They've shut down a lot of Southeast England. They've even shut down some of the relations with the travel coming in and out of England. What do we know about this new strain? How new is it?
Well, it's new in that the people in the UK, the Brits, noticed it, as you said, about a few weeks ago. It is dominating the situation in the southeastern part of the UK. It seems to be the suggestion that it may be transmitted more easily and more efficiently because the mutation is at an area that allows it to bind more efficiently to the receptor on the cell that allows you to get infected. Looking at whether or not it makes individuals more severely ill. According to these preliminary reports, no, that does not seem to be the case. The next question one asks is that does the mutation interfere with the efficacy of a vaccine in inducing protection? Thus far, there's no indication that that's the case. However, having said that, we need to take this seriously and we need to investigate it much further. As you and I are speaking now, that's going on in a very intense way. Both in the UK, here in the United States, we at the NIH are in communication with our colleagues in the UK to try and get the isolate to work with so that we can do the kinds of experiments that would give us a better feel for what the ultimate impact might be. So bottom line is we are all over this, but it is something we need to keep our eye on and take seriously.
Looking in the long term, is this going to be a chronic illness for the human population? Is this going to be more like polio or smallpox we can eradicate and it's gone? Or is it going to be something we're going to have to deal with every year in one form or another?
Well, I don't think we're going to eradicate it. In all of history, we've only eradicated one human virus, and that's smallpox. I believe that we can control and likely eliminate it in certain countries, and that is going to be totally dependent upon the uptake of vaccines. I mean, we eliminated polio in our country. We eliminated, with few exceptions of sections that don't do it, namely measles. We've eliminated a number of other infections in this country. I believe that we could do it. Elimination is different than eradication. Eradication will be difficult to do.
That was Dr. Anthony Fauci of the National Institutes of Health. Coming up, it's been a wild year with almost as many ups as downs for the economy and for the markets. And Catherine Mann, Citigroup Chief Global Economist, puts it all together for us.
Unemployment, we're not going to see strength of the labor market going into 2022, 2023.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This week, we got another read on third quarter GDP numbers for the United States, reinforcing the notion that we are getting a strong bounce back from that miserable second quarter, but still raising questions about what comes next, which is what we asked Citigroup Chief Global Economist Catherine Mann about.
Going into the second half of next year, we're looking for being close to where we were pre-COVID if you look at the GDP numbers. But, you know, GDP is an aggregate of an awful lot of different sectors of the economy. And what we've seen is much stronger retail sales as people rotate out of services spending and into, you know, buying things for their home, buying things, cars and so forth, durable goods. That rotation is what is keeping GDP from looking worse than it would be. But if we have continued softness in the services sector, again, tremendous collapse in services, tremendous contraction. And we have to remember that the U.S. economy runs on services. 67 cents of every dollar that a household spends is on services. And so we've got to have that come back. That is a function both of people having money to spend, but also being willing to go out and spend it on services, being, that's where the vaccine comes in. That's where some of the concerns about people getting vaccinated, changing their behavior. And that's where we, kind of worry about the going forward into the latter half of the year, particularly in light of, as I say, concerns about the vaccine acceptance and delivery and whether or not businesses will be ready to take on the demand. Unemployment, we don't see that recovering.
Sorry?
We don't. That's the other thing. GDP might recover by the middle of the next year back to where it was at the beginning of this year. So a full year and a half of recession or below pre-COVID level of GDP. But unemployment, we're not going to see strength of the labor market going into 2022, 2023. So again, bifurcation between GDP and employment, bifurcation between durables, retail sales, and services.
Yeah, it's one of the things you've pointed out is the various asymmetries, even around the globe, that some parts are coming back, some places are not coming back. One of my questions is, we have to have the services, for example, come back. Are we sure it will come back? In this sense, could we do some permanent damage to parts of the economy? And as we look at small businesses going out of business, small restaurants, various leisure and entertainment facilities, is it possible we just won't come back in some parts of the economy?
Well, again, services is a pretty big category. We've got health services, discretionary health services. I think there will be the recovery there. You've got leisure and hospitality. I actually think people desperately want to go on vacation. I think they want a vacation outside of their own house. So, that will come back. I think entertainment, entertainment in person, sports, Broadway, concerts, people want to go back and be in the real life. So those will come back. There are other services. Restaurants will come back. It will be a different configuration of restaurants, though. I think a lot of the smaller ones will not come back. Some consolidation of the chains, I think, is what we could be looking for in terms of that component of services. Business services, a lot of them are going to be done by Zoom. So it's a different kind of business service.
Catherine, you also mentioned Europe, and I wonder about the sort of asynchronous growth. We like to have synchronous growth globally, but right now it looks like Asia may be doing pretty well. We're limping along, sort of recovering, but more slowly perhaps than we liked, and Europe seems to be the laggard. Does that put some limitation on our overall ability to grow the economy globally?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the synchronous global growth is something that we've been looking for quite some time. And yes, Asia coming out sooner, the U.S. In the middle of next year. But, the euro area has been delayed, or, the timetable for returning to the pre-COVID level of GDP has been delayed off into the second half of 2022. So you've got three major engines of the global economy really in asynchronous timetables. And that means you don't get any beneficial spillovers from one area to the next. It puts a greater premium on domestic demand within economies, pulling up their own bootstraps. But, that doesn't work for every economy. And, it would be better if we were all coming out of this COVID crisis at the same time. But it doesn't seem to be in the cards, and that creates some fragility at the global level.
That was Catherine Mann, Chief Global Economist at Citigroup. Coming up, as the Trump administration enters its final days, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross gives us his read on what it accomplished in its confrontation with China.
Big issues like market access still remain, so there is work to be done.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. One of the top priorities for the Trump administration was bringing China to heel on an array of trade and security issues through use of things like tariffs and outright bans on dealings with Chinese companies. We asked one of the principal architects of that trade policy, Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce, what, in his view, the Trump administration accomplished.
First of all, you have the Phase 1 deal, which was announced a while ago, that largely deals with commercial side of things, deals with agriculture, deals with manufactured products, deals with energy. So that was a very good thing to level the playing field a bit. There still remains Phase 2, which largely has to do with better market access, more respect for intellectual property, that kind of thing that is harder to quantify, but at least as important in the overall picture. Meanwhile, we have been struggling to combat the rising military threat of China, both industrial espionage, taking militarily insensitive products, technology into China, and most recently we put 103 more companies on our list. That's a very big number. It's very precise in that these are the actual subsidiaries of big Chinese conglomerates that are part of the military establishment. We call them military end users. Prior to that, we had dealt with the issue of Huawei and ZTE for their violations and for the 5G competition springing up between China and ourselves. And then in between, we did a lot of things about semiconductors. Most recently, SMIC, Semiconductor Manufacturing Industry Corp., the largest of the Chinese semiconductor manufacturers. And then on the other side of the equation, we're trying to encourage a more robust semiconductor ecosystem here in the United States. And that was authorized in the National Defense Authorization Act that just went through. So those have been a few of the very dramatic things relating to China.
It has been dramatic. There's no question about that. And one of the items of drama have been imposition of tariffs. Looking back over it now, has the imposition of tariffs had the affected result that you wanted as a practical matter? Whether it's trade in goods like your phase one or more broadly, do you think it's really made a difference in our trading with China, or is this setting the stage for something yet to come?
Well, it's both. It has had accomplishment. The Chinese commitment, for example, to purchase agriculture is huge. And I believe it will turn out that this past year that's just ending will be the largest agricultural purchase year that China has ever had from the U.S. That's a very good thing because our farmers have been hurting. Remember, though, we have remained with tariffs on quite a lot of goods coming from China. And the major reason for that is to still have some trading room so that if we do get the kinds of concessions that are needed for the bigger issues, that we have something to give them potentially in exchange. So I think it was a very well-balanced use of tariffs, pulling off tariffs on some in a reciprocal way as they lowered their tariff and non-tariff trade barriers to us, but leaving some in reserve so that we can get the rest of the way. Because we must solve the technology problem, that we must solve the industrial espionage, we must solve the stealing of secrets in various ways, and we must solve their efforts to become the dominant military power at our expense.
And President Trump and you, I must say, have made that a priority, dealing with the industrial espionage, some of the theft of intellectual property, things like that. Can you measure that and see where we've actually made a difference, or has it not kicked in yet? I mean, is there less of it today than there was 4 years ago?
Well, they have passed some legislation that moves a little bit in the right direction, but big issues like market access still remain. So there is work to be done. And we knew that. Remember, this was not announced as a complete trade deal. This was announced as a phase one. So we and the Chinese both are well aware that there's much more to do, and hopefully that will happen in the coming periods.
That was Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross. Coming up, another historic economic recovery package finally makes it through the Congress, only to be met by President Trump's demand that it go back and increase payments to individuals. Senator Durbin of Illinois was one of those who helped Congress come together on the bill sitting on the president's desk.
This started about 3 or 4 weeks ago with 8 senators. I was one of them. 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans eating dinner at a safe social distance in someone's living room.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. It took 7 long months, and it wasn't always pretty. But this week, Democrats and Republicans laid down their arms and came to an agreement on a $900 billion stimulus package that would be the second largest in U.S. history. But that was only met by President Trump objecting to the fact they hadn't given enough in direct payments to individuals. Well, however that plays out, Dick Durbin was one of the key senators who brought about this compromise. And he said that there is no question that it is necessary and that actually more may be needed.
There'll be relief for millions of Americans by extending unemployment benefits, at least, I'm looking for the final language, 10 or 11 weeks. Also making almost $300 billion available in loans to businesses, which I think is going to mean survival for some of these businesses, literally. More money for the logistics of the vaccination campaign, help for the schools. It is a long list and a very good list.
Well, it comes, obviously, Senator, at a time when the country is hurting. I mean, we have more and more cases, more and more hospitalization, even, I'm sorry to say, deaths. What will this do for the people, for example, back in your home state of Illinois?
Well, we have thousands who are going to lose unemployment insurance the day after Christmas, December 26th. That's just a few days away. And now they're assured that the check is coming. It may take a little delay to receive it, but they will be receiving the money. And for some of these businesses, they had no place else to turn but an additional forgivable loan. And I hope we can help them out to stay in business.
This is the second largest such stimulus bill in history, as I understand it. Second only to the CARES Act, bigger than what happened back in 2008, 2009. Is it big enough?
No. And I hope that we are open to the notion that we are not in recovery to an extent that we can ignore this in the future. We may have to extend unemployment again. We may have to help businesses again. But the bottom line is the Federal Reserve is giving us a kind of a direction here, basically saying, keep your foot on the accelerator. We don't want this economy to slump into a deep recession. And I believe them. They are doing everything they can from a monetary policy. We should do what we can from the fiscal side.
Do you have a sense about whether you'll succeed in that? I mean, there's no way of knowing, obviously, but we have various experts, economists, investors who are saying they think basically this act will prevent the so-called W, that is to say, dipping back down into a second recession. Do you have some confidence of that?
Well, I'm hopeful. I hope it is. And maybe with the vaccines online, more and more Americans being protected, finally see a downturn in infections and hospitalizations and death. That, I think, is what we're praying for. And that will mean a new day. We'll see a more positive future. And I think that optimism can bring the economy back.
Assuming there's some more help that's needed as we get into the spring, is there anything you can do right now to position the question to maximize the chance that you'll be able to get that help?
Well, we have to watch carefully to see what the impact of this, and there's a lag time, I'm sure, between congressional action and impact on the economy. But there also is going to be a shot in the arm in terms of confidence and optimism. People see this coming. You can witness that in the stock market, for example, in some aspects of it. There is a feeling that perhaps we're really serious about getting out of this hole that we're in. And if that optimism is demonstrated in the next couple of months, I think we can make our case that the right stimulus and the right amount at the right time can help us to a smooth glide path.
Is there anything in your experience on this round, this $900 billion round, that would inform or encourage you that maybe there is a way for Republicans and Democrats to work together on what may be necessary for another round come the new year?
Well, yes, I think there is. And consider, this started about 3 or 4 weeks ago with 8 senators. I was one of them. 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans eating dinner at a safe social distance in someone's living room and talking about whether or not we could break the deadlock on COVID relief. We did it. In 3 weeks, we put together a bill. We introduced it a week ago. And look where we are today. We're talking about enacting this into law and making a major impact on the economy. It was a group of 8 senators that grew to 11 or 12 ultimately that really was a moving force. I think grassroots bipartisan force and energy can make a difference in the Senate, regardless of who's in charge.
That was Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin of Illinois. Coming up, Britain discovers a new, more contagious strain of COVID, leading to its partial isolation, including the closing of its port of Dover.
It really seems like a sort of doomsday scenario almost when you have a major port closed.
This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg. This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This week saw a virtual shutdown of London and much of southeast England after discovery of a new, more contagious strain of COVID-19, leading a host of countries to terminate travel from England, and France for a time stopping even trade in goods. We asked Senior Executive Editor for Economics at Bloomberg, Stephanie Flanders, what the effect might be on the British economy.
It really seems like a sort of doomsday scenario almost when you have a major port closed, which obviously is responsible for a big chunk of Britain's particularly fresh fruit and veg at this time of year. And there's also a lot of meat that's stuck on this side trying to get over the channel. Obviously, we worry about how long that's even going to keep. I think we've had, as you know, David, there's been disruption and certainly a lot of build-up of and bottlenecks across the world in ports because of the way that trade has picked up very quickly and not enough ships to take all of this freight. So you then have cargo piling up at the ports outside the UK, but that was already happening at Dover before you had the decision by the French to close the port. And there are literally thousands of trucks there now, and we're now wondering what on earth is going to happen to them. But you're right that the significance for the economy could be very significant combined with the new lockdowns which were announced in the last couple of days, which really affect maybe it's only a chunk of the English population, but it's responsible for about 85% of Britain's GDP. So it's a big deal.
It was triggered originally by France, as I understand it, saying, forget about the travel. We don't want goods going back and forth either. Apparently now President Macron is backing off of that and saying we're going to start up the trade once again. At the same time, are there longer-term consequences we should anticipate, no matter almost what happens with Brexit?
Well, exactly. So we know that even if, we talk about sort of no deal versus deal, but the kind of deal that we're looking at has always been one that suggested a big increase in customs regulations, a big increase in the need for both sides to inspect goods coming in and out. Now, the British have always said, they've sort of fudged this. They've said, we won't actually do the increased inspection on European goods coming in for 6 months, to try and avoid that kind of hit in the short term. But the Europeans are legally obliged to do all their checks from day one, and they have insisted they will do that. So already you have had a lot of hauliers and truck drivers say, you know what, we're going to steer clear of the UK ports for a few months to see how this shakes out. So that was already causing strain and worry.
And Stephanie, give us a sense of what the tools are in the toolkit and whose toolkit is it? Because it's not clear exactly to me what the Bank of England could do to help the situation. What can Boris Johnson do?
Well, so our economists are now predicting on the basis of this new lockdown a double-dip recession with the UK economy shrinking again in the last three months of this year and the first 3 months of 2021. We hadn't quite got there previously because we thought you would get quite a pickup in the first quarter despite Brexit. But with that, we know that there is quite a lot of support, even though output may shrink. We've had all along through this pandemic, this support coming from governments for incomes. So the furlough scheme that's employing this big chunk of the UK workforce, thanks to with the government picking up the tab, that carries on now through April. It's been extended even longer. There's other forms of support for business. So in a sense, everything that's going to be supporting the economy is already happening. And there's not much the Bank of England can do about a long line of trucks at Dover or lockdowns preventing people from purchasing services or going to restaurants. They're just going to have to hang tight and make sure that confidence is still there when we get through the pandemic.
And Stephanie, finally, give me a sense of the compliance on the part of the British citizens right now. Here in the United States, as you know, we have some people who don't want to comply. We've seen some of it in continental Europe. Are the British being more compliant with some of this strict lockdown than maybe we've seen other places?
I think there's been a similar thing across Europe where initially compliance was very high, but once if confidence is lost in the reasoning behind it and the scientific basis and indeed the leaders that are announcing it, then obviously one starts to worry that people aren't going to follow. I would say the British have surprised on the upside in actually supporting restrictions and following them. But certainly the younger population, there's been quite a lot of breaches already. I think people are sort of holding their breath to see what happens at Christmas, because there is a great feeling of unease and resentment of the way the government has continually changed its tune. So it's a difficult time to have leaders in whom people seem to have very little confidence.
That was Stephanie Flanders, Senior Executive Editor for Economics at Bloomberg. Coming up, we wrap up the week as we do every week with our special contributor, Larry Summers of Harvard. This is Wall Street Week on Bloomberg.
This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin, and we wrap up the week as we do every week with our special contributor, Larry Summers of Harvard. So, Larry, a lot of the talk this week was about stimulus. We thought we had that $908 billion stimulus bill. Then President Trump up and said, no, I don't like it. What do you think about where we are in stimulus?
Look, we're better off with stimulus than we are without stimulus. I don't think the $2,000 checks make much sense. The real issue is going to be sustaining this expansion. You think about it, the 908 stimulus bill probably would pay out $200 to $250 billion a month for the next 3 months. The level of compensation is running about $30 billion a month below what we would have expected it would. GDP is running about $70 billion a month below what we would have expected it would. So in a way that's quite unprecedented, we have stimulus already much more than filling out the hole. And given that lots of the hole is from the fact not that people don't want to spend, but that they can't spend because they can't take a flight or they can't go to a restaurant, I don't necessarily think that the priority should be on promoting consumer spending beyond where we are now. So I'm not even sure that I'm so enthusiastic about the $600 checks. And I think taking them to $2,000 would actually be a pretty serious mistake that would risk a temporary overheat. I would like to see more assistance to state and local governments. I would like to see more money put into testing, more money put into accelerating vaccines. But gosh, David, I think it would be a real mistake to be going to $2,000. And I have to say that when you see the two extremes agreeing, you can almost be certain that something crazy is in the air. And so when I see a coalition of Josh Hawley, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump getting behind an idea, I think that's time to run for cover. And I know that many of my fellow Keynesians who believe in fiscal stimulus will likely be in favor of this, but sometimes there can be too much, too poorly designed of even a basically good idea. And that's my reaction to $2,000 stimulus.
Well, it's not massive the way a move to $2,000 a person would be, but when you talk about maybe poorly designed, we've got a 5,600-page bill, give or take here. A lot of stuff in there probably nobody knows is quite what's in there. But you've had a chance to look at some of it now. Are there some things that really jump out at you and say, boy, that doesn't make much sense to me?
There are two things that strike me as really big time dumb. The first is the resurrection of the 3-martini lunch. That was repealed by like the Reagan administration on principle that why should the company canteen not be tax deductible when you eat there, and fat cat executive lunches be deductible for all concerns and not treated as income. We put it back for 2 years. That's beyond where people think this pandemic's going to be. The reason they put it back for 2 years was because they knew that once it had been there for 2 years, it was going to be hard not to keep extending. So I think that qualifies as the worst tax provision of the decade. And it's a decade that's seen some real doozies. The other one, David, where it doesn't make much sense is if you get a PPP loan and so you don't bear any expense for a portion of your payroll, why should you get to deduct a payment you didn't make? Or equivalently, if the government's going to give you money, how come that's not being called income? And so that sort of overpayment seems to me to be another thing that's just a straight out giveaway. And make no mistake, these things are not there by accident. These things are there because people put them there. And they're there then because other people didn't have the courage to resist them, even though they knew that they were wrong.
I talked to Dr. Anthony Fauci, and he said he thinks a sort of a base case, center of the bell curve, is we'll be back to something approaching what he called normal by the end of the summer, toward Labor Day. And he defined that as 75 to 80% of the populace inoculated. Does that make sense to you?
I'll be disappointed if it takes until September to get 75% of the population inoculated. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to do it more quickly. I hope that more vaccines will come online than the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines that are online now. I think there's some legitimate issues about whether people should have to get 2 doses or whether 1 dose would be appropriate in many cases. I think there are other things we can do to facilitate a return towards normality that center on making testing much more inexpensive and pervasively available. In general, while the worst by far of the errors have been those of President Trump and those of some of the people on the political side, I think the scientific community's desire for perfection has again and again stopped us from having very, very valuable improvement. The FDA shouldn't be blocking many of the tests they're currently blocking. These vaccines should have come on stream a bit sooner than they did. And we need to be thinking about things from a broad population ethic point of view, which speaks to the importance of speed.
We're going to wrap up the week, as always, with Summer Says. Lightning round here. First of all, as you look at the Biden cabinet and the question of Senate confirmation for the ones who need to be confirmed, if you were going to guess, what portion of that cabinet will be confirmed by January 31?
I would guess that 80% will be confirmed by January 31 and that 90 to 95% will be ultimately confirmed. My guess is there'll be 1 or 2 cases that aren't confirmed, and that the vast majority of those who are confirmed will have been confirmed by the end of January.
What is the biggest political surprise we're going to have over the next 6 months, in your opinion?
I think Donald Trump's going to fade from public view faster than most people expect right now. It's always true that bullies collapse in the face of a bit of kryptonite, and his various legal problems are going to be that kryptonite. If you go back in history to 2 figures who had some resemblance to Donald Trump, Joe McCarthy and Douglas MacArthur both rode extremely high and dominated the media until they didn't. And once they had passed their zenith, the collapse was faster than most people expected. I think that's going to happen with respect to Donald Trump, and I'll bet right now that he will not be a serious candidate for president in 2024.
And let's wrap it up with a markets-related question, the dollar. There's a lot of talk right now about the dollar. and specifically maybe Janet Yellen as she becomes Treasury Secretary, which most people expect, really taking that mantle the Treasury Secretaries have had, as you know, since the mid-90s, of saying we need a strong dollar. Pache, put aside for one moment what Donald Trump did about it. What do you think the dollar is going to be doing a year from now, stronger or weaker than it is right now?
David, as J.P. Morgan used to say when he was asked a similar question, my prediction based on all my experience in the markets is that the dollar will, I'm very confident about this, fluctuate in the year ahead. I'd be surprised if there was a large move. Janet, as every Treasury Secretary does, will have to find her line on the dollar. I certainly hope she will make clear that it's the Biden administration's intent to build prosperity on a strong foundation of fundamentals, rather than indulge in any idea that it's possible to devalue your way to prosperity. And how she expresses that thought, I'm confident she will find a good way. But it's that essence of a focus on fundamentals rather than devaluation as a prosperity strategy is, I think, the point on which financial authorities have to be clear.
Larry Summers, special contributor to Wall Street Week of Harvard, and of course, former Treasury Secretary. Thank you so much for being with us.
Finally, one more thought. Not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. For 7 long months, Republicans and Democrats agreed on the need for more stimulus to help small businesses, to help people who had been thrown out of work.
Our purpose has always been to crush the virus, to put money in the pockets of the American people, which we do in this legislation.
It is packed with targeted policies that help struggling Americans who've already waited entirely too long.
But for 7 long months, they couldn't for the life of them agree on how much help was needed or where it should go.
We've offered compromises. The Speaker on a number of issues is still dug in. If she wants to compromise, there will be a deal.
But just as it looked like they'd run out of time, a small group of senators from both sides of the aisles got together and somehow miraculously found a way. They met over a takeout dinner at Senator Lisa Murkowski's house up on Capitol Hill, socially distanced, of course, with the windows open. And they considered for the first time, what if we didn't do something sweeping? What if we did just what we need to do right now? And so they came up with a compromise, one that probably no lawmaker was completely satisfied with. And certainly President Trump wasn't satisfied because he immediately demanded they go back and provide for more direct payments to individuals. But nonetheless, they did find a way to compromise. And when they had gotten their deal done, they decided to celebrate. They held a toast with some West Virginia moonshine, courtesy of Senator Joe Manchin. And the senior senator from Illinois, Dick Durbin, well, he participated. And he said it tasted pretty good, although it did take the enamel off of his teeth. And so, as we look to the new year, let's hope for some more good to be done, whatever it might do to the enamel on our teeth. That does it for this episode of Wall Street Week. I'm David Westin. This is Bloomberg. See you next week.